I saw a lot of posts online this week kind of celebrating his death and rejoicing. And listen, I know that Trump does that. He did it with Bob Mueller. He did it with John McCain.
He did it with Rob Reiner.
He did it with Rob Reiner. But it's inhumane, and it's really lacking empathy. And the dead person's dead and can't hear you and can't read your post. But his family, his sister, who he adopted when she was 13 because both their parents died, is alive and is hearing it. And so I think that for the benefit, for humanity, for having, a normal decency towards the family of the dead, that just has to stop.
So Lindsey Graham's unexpected death is turning into what I'd like to call a MPCE, which is a mass pearl-clutching event, because as it turns out, most Americans don't actually have a lot of nice things to say about somebody who was a terrible human being. This man used his power for quite literally nothing but death and destruction. That is the only thing he cared about. But now that he's dead, I guess you're supposed to pretend like he was a good person and be kind and respectful, even though he was never kind and respectful to anyone, including his victims. You're expected to, I guess, overlook all of the harm that he caused around the world in order to protect the feelings of his loved ones. That's according to Ana Navarro, as you saw. But to that I say, as crass as it sounds, fuck not just him, but fuck his family too. Because if his sister is offended by the reaction to his death, then she's getting just a small, tiny little taste of what it felt like to be a family member of the victims of the imperialist wars that her brother advocated for. After the U.S. murdered 168 Iranian children in a school bombing, their parents spent every single night at their graves mourning their children. And Lindsey Graham never once considered their feelings, not even for a second. In fact, he demanded even more blood from Iranians, even though they already suffered quite a bit. Right? But it wasn't enough. At one point, he even implied that Israel should nuke Iran. I'm not making this up.
Why is it okay for America to drop 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end their existential threat war? Why was it okay for us to do that? I thought it was okay. To Israel, do whatever you have to do to survive as a Jewish state.
Senator, again, military officials say
whatever
the technology has changed.
It wasn't okay for America to nuke Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it wouldn't be okay for Israel to nuke Iran. But as you can see, he never considered the pain and suffering endured by anyone else, ever. And after Israel leveled Gaza and committed a modern-day Holocaust in front of the world, which is still ongoing, by the way, Lindsey Graham never once even considered the feelings of the families of victims. In fact, he stood 10 toes down with their aggressor.
Forget it. I'm not with you. I'm with Israel. I will be with Israel to our dying day. They're the best ally we could hope for. So we have a commander-in-chief in President Trump, who I think is Ronald Reagan plus.
So, needless to say, this man was pure fucking evil, a trash human being. He stood with the country committing a genocide, an undeniable genocide that we can all see with our own 2 eyes. He stood with our fascist, war criminal, pedophile president who's wreaking havoc around the globe. And he wished the worst for anyone to dare to even challenge this genocidal state of Israel. He tweeted, "I hope Greta and her friends can swim," implying that it'd be funny to see Israeli terrorists bomb her flotilla and kill her when she tried to deliver aid to starving Palestinians. So you have to forgive everyone, Anna, for not thinking about the feelings of his sister. And quite frankly, if his own sister doesn't think that he's a piece of shit too, then I think that speaks to her character as well, because there are certain universal truths that transcend familial bonds, one of which is that murder is bad. So if you have a family member who is causing unfathomable amounts of pain and suffering around the world to millions of people, being related to them shouldn't stop you from viewing them the way that everybody else views them, as the monsters that they are. But ironically, the pearl clutchers are using Lindsey Graham's sister as a moral cudgel to guilt trip anyone celebrating his death. For example, Kylie Jane Creamer tweeted, "Did you know that Lindsey Graham was only 21 years old when he lost both of his parents? After his mother died of cancer and his father passed away from a heart attack about 15 months later, Lindsey was suddenly left to care for his 13-year-old sister, Darlene, while he was still a college student. He later legally adopted her so she could receive military benefits while he served in the Air Force. Whatever whatever your politics, that's an extraordinary responsibility for someone so young to carry. Please say a prayer for his sister Darlene as she mourns the loss of the brother who she described as kind of like a brother, a father, and a mother rolled into one. But as this person put it, it's kind of ironic how he grew up to be a war hawk, leaving millions of children without parents. Exactly. The attempts to humanize him even make him look worse, because if he knows firsthand how hard it is for a kid to lose their parents, you'd think he'd have more empathy for children around the world whose parents his wars killed. But he always, every single time, without fail, sociopathically advocated for the maximization of pain and suffering because, as closeted as he was, his true sexual orientation was murder, because nothing got this man off more than bloodshed. This man loved death. There was not a war ever that he did not support. But now he's dead, and apparently it's disrespectful to talk negatively about him, even though he never had any respect for life when he was alive. Piers Morgan tweeted out, "Seeing the despicably cruel, heartless, and abusive way that many people in the UK and US have responded to the deaths of conservative politicians Anne Whitcomb and Lindsey Graham reminds me that the least kind people on earth are ironically those on the be kind woke left." Mediaite chastised extremists on both sides who celebrated his death, as did Ben Shapiro, who echoed the same point about how gross it was that people were reacting to Lindsey Graham's death with glee. But much like Lindsey Graham, Ben Shapiro has also never met a war that he didn't like. And if I had to guess, and I'm kind of like psychoanalyzing him, but I think that Ben Shapiro and people like him are disgusted by the widespread celebrations to Graham's death, because deep down, I think that they also believe that Americans are going to have the same reaction in the event they were to unexpectedly die as well. But to kind of ease their fears, I don't necessarily think that that's the case, because there's a meaningful difference between warmongering and warmongering when you have power and voting to greenlight wars of aggression, right? Lindsey Graham used his political power to cause as much pain and suffering as he possibly could. And even though someone like Ben Shapiro cheerleaded him on and is also a piece of shit for doing so, he's only indirectly responsible for crimes against humanity. He may have used his increasingly small social media platform to give political cover to neocons and genocidaires, but he never actually pushed the big red button himself. And so I don't think that there's going to be as much celebration, or that there would be as much celebration in the event of his untimely death. But with that being said, you can't really control how people react to your demise, because every single person on this planet is one day going to cease to exist. And if you don't want people to remember you in a negative way when you die, then you actually need to try to be a positive force for good when you're alive. It doesn't mean that you have to be perfect. Nobody's perfect. We're all flawed human beings. But if you spend the majority of your short existence relishing in the pain and suffering of others, endlessly advocating for inequality and oppression and bigotry and discrimination and genocide, I'm sorry, but you're not entitled to a revisionist rewrite when you die, regardless if you had power or not. People are going to remember you as you were, objectively speaking, and not what you want them to remember you as. The same is true for every single human being on this earth, regardless if they were politicians or not. But the thing about right-wingers is that I think that they actually expect to be venerated when they die. It's why people were fired after Charlie Kirk died for simply quoting him, because right-wingers refuse to come to grips with the legacy that they're leaving behind. They don't want to accept that history will forever regard them as the modern-day Nazi movement, and in 10 to 20 years, most of them are going to pretend like they were never on board with Trump in the first place. But you don't get to reframe how you lived once you're gone. You can only live and be the best person that you can be, and if you are just going out of your way to broadcast to everybody that you're a piece of shit, I'm sorry, that's how people are going to remember you. But as insufferable as conservatives are being right now, I can't not point out how tone-deaf Democratic politicians are in their glowing-ass memorials for Lindsey Graham. It's just baffling to see them go above and beyond to venerate this fucking demon. Genocide enthusiast John Fetterman called him a foreign policy giant, meaning a neocon, and described him as kind, gracious, and thoughtful on a personal level. Amy Klobuchar called him a friend and said he had an almost kid-like exuberance at his job and responsibilities. Oh, shut the fuck up. Kamala Harris said that he was full of wit, energy, and charm, and falsely stated that he cared deeply about the people of South Carolina. That's just objectively not true. But none of these compared to Cory Booker, who basically gave Lindsey Graham a sloppier blowjob than any of the ones that he paid for from male sex workers. But More on that in a moment. First, let's hear one genocide supporter's obituary for another's.
So I go up to Lindsey Graham, and I'm a brand new senator, determined to do something about mass incarceration. And I hear through Dick Durbin and others that he's the guy to work with. And I say, Mr. Graham, sir, I'd like to work with you on criminal justice reform. He seems almost amused by what I said. He goes, Corey, do you understand? I'm in a primary right now, and I'm running against a guy who is batshit crazy. I can't even so much as talk to you right now. Get out of here, man. Come back to me after my primary. And I laughed and came back to him after the primary. And true to his word, he rolled up his sleeves and we went to work. One of the White House negotiators during that first negotiation told me that Lindsey Graham was like an unguided missile. That God, you never knew which way he was going to go, whether he would come back and hit you. I am stunned at Lindsey Graham's death, but I pray that he is reunited with his friend, John McCain, that they both are experiencing God's love, grace, mercy, and forgiveness. My prayers are with his family and all those who loved and cherished him. I will miss my perhaps most unexpected friend in the Senate.
Corey, shut the fuck up. Just shut the fuck up. The fake sad voice is just so over the top, but I will say it's actually very appropriate for him to be described as an unguided missile, given how much he loved shooting those at civilian populations. But with regard to his comments about him being reunited with John McCain, Corey, I know that heaven and hell are not real, but in the event there was an afterlife, do you honestly believe that these mass murdering pieces of shit would be let into heaven? Do you honestly believe that? Really, Corey? John McCain, who was often referred to as a war hero, was actually a war criminal. John McCain was captured in Vietnam, a country the U.S. had no right to invade, by the way, after he bombed a light bulb factory, which is civilian infrastructure that's supposed to be off limits according to international law, which we don't follow, but you're not supposed to do that. See, we don't actually know how many civilians John McCain killed himself, but after that, he went on to advocate for every single war that he could, much like his friend Lindsey Graham. So in the event that they could be reunited in some sort of afterlife, are we going to pretend like they're not in hell right now, Corey? You really think that they're in heaven? I mean, are you being fucking serious? As an actual believer, I have no idea if Corey is an actual sincere believer. I don't think he is. But if he were, do you honestly believe that mass murdering war criminal pieces of shit are going to be let into the pearly gates of heaven? What is the point of heaven? Like, is hell not supposed to be a deterrent? And is heaven not supposed to entice people into being good, moral people? I mean, if it's the case that Lindsey Graham and John McCain could be let into heaven, then nobody would have a reason to act morally if the most bloodthirsty war criminals in human history are able to get into heaven. So it's just fucking embarrassing. Like, he's got to give Lindsey Graham the sloppiest blowjob, so sloppy that he has to wipe his ass afterwards because he is also a war criminal. Cory Booker also supports genocide, so he too, like the conservatives we talked about, wants to be remembered fondly when I don't think that's going to be the case, given how he voted to give Israel bombs that they dropped on the heads of children. So he has blood on his hands, not as much as Lindsey Graham's, but give him time, and he will. But this is why people fucking hate Democrats. They're just so embarrassing. They always go out of their way to cuck themselves to the worst fucking people in the country, and they do this, I guess, so that way they look like good people, even though the people that they cuck themselves to would never do the same for them, would never pay them the same respect. And all that they do with shit like this is show to their base how out of touch they are. Now, having said that, I'm not expecting Democratic colleagues of Lindsey Graham to come out and say, fuck him, I'm glad he's dead. That's not my expectation, to be clear. But you can just sit back and say nothing. You can just zip your lips and not say anything. That's always an option, but they can't help themselves. And it's expectedly leading to backlash from the left, who are calling their comments nauseating because their comments are pretty fucking nauseating. It's a huge fuck you to all of the families of victims that Lindsey Graham has hurt, and a middle finger to their voters who look like the people that Lindsey Graham murdered. But let's be real, a lot of these same Democrats have also used their power to cause pain and suffering around the world too. Maybe they weren't as gung-ho as Lindsey Graham, but these same Democrats eulogizing him never wasted an opportunity to give anyone who cared about the Palestinian genocide the middle finger, which is why I think that the reaction to Lindsey Graham's untimely death really does say a lot about your character, because if you're not at least a little bit happy or relieved at a minimum to see that he died so he can no longer hurt more people, I actually think that you're a bad person, or at least you're morally confused. I really do, because as taboo as it may be to speak ill of the dead, it is natural and reasonable to feel happiness when people who love death experience the thing that they love so much themselves. Nobody would bat an eye if you said, good riddance to some serial killer who died. But God forbid you share a gif of the fucking crab dance when a bloodthirsty politician dies, even if they're responsible for more deaths than the most notorious serial killers around the world. Don't you dare say shit about a politician who caused more death and destruction than any serial killer, because then you're the bad person. It's just crazy to me. But we've been conditioned to think that the neoconservative politicians who always vote for war somehow aren't morally equivalent to serial killers because they're a few steps removed from the people who pull the trigger or drop the bomb. But I mean, the institutionalization of murder isn't going to change the outcome. It's still murder. Social murder is murder, and murder is murder, and you are still very much culpable, even if you're 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 steps removed from the crime. And I think that more people are actually starting to see it this way, which is why politicians and pundits are clutching their pearls. It's not just about the legacy that they want to be remembered for when they die. They also don't want us to view the use of their power as violence, because the system depends on violence. The system reinforces itself by getting us to think that its violence towards us is necessary and legitimate. So the very survival of our violent capitalist system hinges on them getting us to not view what they do to us and humanity as violence. Because if we see the system for what it actually is, which is violent, then we might want to rise up and challenge it. So that's also what this is about. But before we end, I just want to point out some funny things that have happened since Lindsey Graham has died. So the Trump regime is apparently pissed off that Nancy Mace decided to immediately throw her hat in the ring to replace Lindsey Graham before his body was even cold. And she soft-launched her campaign with a famous Al Pacino quote from The Godfather 3, where he says, "Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in." And Axios reports, if Mace ends up in a runoff, we'll drop $2 million on her head to keep her out, said one top official with Trump's political operation. All we want is a Republican who is sane and can work with the White House. That's ironic coming from the White House. Another said, POTUS wasn't a fan already, but putting herself out as a candidate while everyone was absorbing the news of Lindsey's death was in poor taste, even for Mace. So I've got to say, I can appreciate that Lindsey's death is already causing GOP infighting, but that's not all, because apparently NDAs have no legal power once the person who forced you to sign them dies. And as a result, trans author and actress Jessie James Rose took to Instagram to spill the tea on Lindsey Graham, writing, "Most of you know him as the homophobic senator from South Carolina, but to me, he will always be the man who paid a Twinkie pre-transition college student, meaning her, a fat stack of cash to do unspeakable things to him in a hotel room while he wore red lingerie." She adds, "It is an absolute mindfuck to me that one of the reasons I have any semblance of financial security and a lack of student loans is because of this man. At the time, I had no idea who he was, and I only figured it out because another group of twinks leaked Lady G to the media." And for those who don't remember, Lady G was Lindsey Graham's nickname, according to the male sex workers who claim that Lindsey Graham was a client of theirs. Now, I don't know what we're supposed to do with this information because it's not surprising in the slightest. Fork found in kitchen, right? But, I mean, if you're one of the 3 Americans who didn't know that Lindsey Graham was a closeted homosexual, now you do. Do with that information what you need to. But in closing, I just want to reiterate the fact that people who are guilt-tripping you for celebrating his death, they are morally superior to no one, and I mean no one. You are not immoral for taking comfort in the death of people who caused unfathomable levels of pain and suffering. It's the people who are willing to overlook what he did who should be the ones feeling shame right now. With that being said, rest in peace, Lindsey Graham, and rest in peace, Sam Neill.
Excuse me. Vagina.